Hi, my name is Sheila Johnson. I'm from Milford, Connecticut. I have two grandparents that immigrated from Ireland around 1906, 1910. And I lived with them for the first 5 years of my life because my father was fighting in World War II. So kind of lived through that phase, which wasn't too much fun, and I often wonder how we all fit in that little tiny house, but we did. But they met in Manhattan, where they had both immigrated. She came over in 1906 or so, legally, came in and stayed with her aunt. My grandfather, Tom McAlevey, jumped ship after he met her and stayed in Manhattan. And I do have records showing that he came over from Liverpool, where he was working as a shipmate in one of those very large ships, and jumped ship. Never got paid because they didn't pay them until they went back. He was from county. What I know about them is that they hated the British, that the black and tans were not very good people, and they only went back once to visit family, which is kind of sad. But I do have a lot of family information because I reconnected with people in Ireland and have also become an Irish citizen. Let's see, he was from County Armagh. His parents had both been married before. They were leasing in the Forkhill area. I don't know what happened in the famine in the Forkhill area, but they had a very good landlord there. Not perfect, but really did a lot for the people. I think they were Jacksons, maybe. I have that information at home. And Bridget and James were his parents. James McAlevey and Bridget Bailey was her maiden name, and she had married a Burns and had 3 children. He had married Bridget Linden and had a few children. Then they got together and had children, and there was like 12 of them, I think. My grandfather was the only one that immigrated to the States. Because of disease and accidents, some of their children died young after having children. So they raised, I think, a total of 18 to 20 children between the grandchildren and their own. Now, this was people who, according to records, didn't read, didn't write, but they raised these families and just took in whoever they needed to take in. Unfortunately, a lot was lost from that family. They were from Shanroe, the town of Land in Shanroe, and Sheehan, in the Forkhill area. But after the death of the last sibling, the British came in and destroyed everything in the home. But when I visited in 1994, it was interesting because one of my mom's first cousins showed where the black and tans would take in her father and other relatives, and just keep them for a couple days and play with them and then let them go, just to have fun. He went back one time that I know of. This is Tom. The land was left to him, and he ended up selling it because it was after the leases were over and you're able to pay rent. The rent went towards purchase. And he sold it to the Forestry Service. I did visit there. There's no home anymore, but I was standing on that land and have a few rocks at home. I did meet Martin, who lived with my grandparents and was like 17 when the last one died, and he was really very, very upset that the land didn't go to him. He wanted it. And I told him, and I know it's true, that Tom would have let him have it if he knew that's what he wanted, because I have letters from his half-siblings demanding that he continue to pay the rent, which he was doing, and they weren't willing to. So there was 11 of them that could have paid, but they didn't. And he didn't have a lot of money. He was always just a laborer here in the States. So I felt good that visiting Martin, I kind of cleared that up for him. There was also a relative that I met on the internet that was from the first McAlevey family. And there was always a lot of friction there as well, because you know how families can be. And I actually have a letter that explained all that was going on, and it kind of healed that whole process too. So it's interesting how when you go back and forth between this family stories from Ireland and Connecticut, that there could be some healing from misunderstandings. I never heard anything about the Famine area from either of them, but I do have the family on all sides traced back to 1800. Again, all I heard is how terrible the British were, which I kind of understand. Even in the 50s, destroying all the family photos and letters, it's not a good thing. They had moved from the farm into Belfast to work and for the children to go to school. And then the parents moved back after the children were grown and married. So they went back to near Mullabon, where the family gravestones are to this day. And then my grandmother was from the Clark family, and she was one of 5 children. And they were from near Gorton in a place called Fallalower. That's, again, just a little lane. Wasn't any towns. I guess Strabane would be the closest, or Cookston, to that area, or Omagh. But if you look at the censuses, they were working in linens. They rose flax. When I was a young girl, the only great aunt that stayed would send me flax every now and then, so I don't have it anymore. I wish I had kept it. But I was just fascinated to wonder what they were doing. And I have actually a lot of newspaper accounts that I gathered on that family. They were fairly prominent in the area, I believe. I know I've seen graves of Celtic crosses with, I'm not saying they were wealthy, they were just prominent, not wealthy by any means, but respected. But some of them were priests, etc. So when I visited there was still there was a large home and a very big barn that had been sold in 1980 to another Clark. That land, let's see, they followed the Irish naming system, both of my families did. And John and Mary, who were my great-grandparents, were married like in 1879, had their first child, which was my grandmother, in 1880. And their first son was John, because the first son was always John. Actually, the first son was called after the father, which was the same as, in this case, as the father. So John died when he was in his 30s. So and all the other children had moved to the States. So Charlie, my Uncle Charlie, inherited the farm after I had the original will that my great-grandfather wrote that allowed for his daughter, who stayed and never married, to live in the farm throughout her lifetime, which she did. That was my Aunt Lizzie. And is it 15 minutes up? But when I went to visit there, that farm went to Charlie, and then his son was named John, and the farm went to him, and he didn't really it was very difficult for him to purchase the farm. He looked into it. It was really much too difficult living in the States. So I found recently the sale of that was in 1980. My Aunt Lizzie died in 1966, so it took a while. Same year I was married. And when I visited there, I called ahead. I had a great uncle that was very good at keeping family information in Ireland. So there wasn't any family that we knew of there, but he did know of a neighbor that he kept in contact with. She lived across the street from the family land. So in 1994, we went there. We had been followed in the north at that time. There was a ceasefire on one side, but not the other. And we had been in bandit country down in Armagh. So we were being followed by helicopters and people with guns for most of the time we were there. But when I stopped in Gorton just to see if we were in the right area to reach the homeland. And it was interesting, when I stopped in, I said, I'm here to, it was this little shop, very small town. I said, I'm here to visit Teresa McCormick to find out about my Aunt Lizzie Clark. And he said, oh, you're a John Peter Clark. He knew what family I was in. That's very important when you're doing family history, to know that the nickname of the family, since there's all Clarks, Devlins, and McCullers all over the place there. And so we went to visit Teresa, and she brought us over. But when we were in the land, I just found the picture the other day, there was a burned out car on the perimeter of the property. I said, what's that? And she said, well, the lad was going by and the bomb blew up too soon. And the Brits took what was there over to your family's land. I was glad that they left. It seemed like every cemetery we were in, we saw young people that had died very young because of so-called troubles. I have found a lot of newspaper articles, especially on the Clark farm, because they had a large piece, but they had sold, I have pictures of it and I have the whole story at home. They had they didn't sell, they leased to the church, I believe it was, to have like a gathering place. There was a small building there. And Teresa said that my Aunt Lizzie had a great voice and she'd go there and sing, and that was a gathering place for the people to have some fun. And so I have all kinds of stories about the big arguments they had and court proceedings about this, and mentioning my great-grandfather. So I do have a lot of stories at home that I'm willing to share, that I put all together.